Hello, and welcome to this webinar presented on behalf of the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, otherwise known as TIGTA. My name is Terry Bellamy, and I am a special agent with TIGTA. I am also TIGTA's National Victim Witness Coordinator, and will be presenting this webinar today entitled Protecting Taxpayers, a Look at IRS Impersonation Scams. First, I would like to give you a brief explanation of the general goal of the Department of Justice Elder Justice Initiative and this webinar. As part of the 2015 White House Conference on Aging, the Department of Justice committed to provide training to prosecutors, victim specialists, advocates, and law enforcement on the issue of elder abuse. The Elder Justice Initiative puts the spotlight on issues facing older adults, and participants in this initiative aspire to empower people across every generation to be advocates. By harnessing technology, such as webinars like this, we are able to bring this important conversation to communities across the country and can advance our efforts to promote the dignity, health, and economic security of older Americans. TIGTA's collaboration with the Elder Justice Initiative allows us to introduce our agency to all of you and to explain TIGTA's relationship to the IRS and our nation's tax administration. Additionally, we will highlight criminal activities in TIGTA's jurisdiction that may target older adults, describe our ongoing efforts to proactively combat these scams, and provide resources for victims of crimes within TIGTA's jurisdiction. What is TIGTA? The Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration was created by Congress as part of the Internal Revenue Service Restructuring and Reform Act of 1998, or RRA 98, in order to provide independent oversight of the IRS. Prior to RRA 98, TIGTA existed as the IRS Inspection Service, an anti-corruption agency created by President Harry Truman in 1951. TIGTA is mandated to promote integrity in America's tax system. It provides independent audit and investigative services to improve the economy, efficiency, and effectiveness of IRS operations. TIGTA's oversight activities are designed to identify high-risk systemic inefficiencies in IRS operations and to investigate individuals and groups whose criminal activities assail the reputation and integrity of the IRS. Approximately 83,000 IRS employees collect over $3 trillion in tax revenue, process 260 million tax returns, and issue over $400 billion in tax refunds every year. TIGTA protects the integrity of the IRS and its ability to collect revenue owed to the federal government through the investigative programs administered by the Office of Investigations, OI. OI investigations and proactive initiatives focus on three primary areas to accomplish its mission. TIGTA OI investigates allegations of IRS employee misconduct, external threats to IRS employees and IRS data, and other attempts to impede or otherwise interfere with tax administration. Each component is important in its own way to the overall protection of tax administration, and their compromise can challenge the integrity of the nation's voluntary tax system. IRS employee misconduct damages the IRS's ability to deliver taxpayer service, to enforce tax laws effectively, and to collect taxes owed to the federal government. External threats against the IRS impede its ability to fairly, efficiently, and safely carry out its role as the nation's revenue collector. Individuals who attempt to corrupt or otherwise interfere with the IRS through various schemes and frauds also impact the IRS's ability to collect revenue. External attempts to interfere with the IRS can come in many forms, for instance by impersonating IRS employees or misusing IRS seals and symbols, filing false or frivolous documents against IRS employees, using fraudulent IRS documentation to perpetrate criminal activity, offering bribes to IRS employees to influence tax cases, or committing fraud in contracts awarded by the IRS. These attempts to corrupt or otherwise interfere with tax administration not only inhibit the IRS's ability to collect revenue, but also undermine the public's confidence in fair and effective tax administration. This webinar focuses on the most pervasive attempts to interfere with the IRS and tax administration in recent years, but certainly is not all-inclusive. For more than 10 years, the IRS has provided the public with information on its website about what it deems to be the dirty dozen of tax scams. The list, which is compiled annually, features a variety of common scams that taxpayers may encounter, including impersonation scams. Many of these scams peak during the filing season as people prepare their tax returns or utilize the services of paid preparers. Since the fall of 2013, much of TIGTA OI's investigative efforts and resources have been focused on the investigation of a telephone impersonation scam in which more than 2 million Americans have reported to us that they received unsolicited telephone calls from individuals falsely claiming to be IRS or Department of the Treasury employees. In addition, the so-called lottery scam has reemerged as a significant threat to tax administration. Sweepstakes and lottery scams, email and phishing scams, and investment scams are among the top 10 fraud schemes used by criminals to target older adults. Older adults are most likely to have a nest egg, to own their home, and to have excellent credit, all of which make them attractive targets for con artists. In addition, financial scams often go unreported by senior citizens or can be difficult to prosecute, so they often are considered low-risk crimes. TIGTA OI investigates those individuals who impersonate the IRS or its employees in order to obtain personally identifiable information, PII, or to extort money from innocent taxpayers under the guise of a non-existent IRS tax liability of some kind. Such individuals may claim to be IRS employees on the telephone or may use IRS logos, seals, or symbols to create official-looking letters and emails. Impersonators often tell the taxpayers that they owe money to the IRS. Sometimes they trick taxpayers into providing their PII, which the impersonators then use to commit identity theft. Scammers use the perceived power of the IRS to intimidate victims and induce them to send money. As previously stated, TIGTA has logged more than 2 million contacts from taxpayers who reported that they had received telephone calls from individuals who claimed to be IRS employees. As of June 2017, more than 10,700 victims reported that they had paid IRS impersonators more than $57.6 million. Because of their complexity, scams such as these are not typically resolved quickly. The impersonation scam has claimed victims in practically every state. The top 5 states with victims who have suffered financial losses are California, Florida, Illinois, New York, and Texas. The victims are of all ages, gender, economic status, and race. No one is immune from receiving the calls. Lawmakers have reported that they or their relatives have received calls, and congressional offices have referred numerous constituent complaints about the scam to TIGTA. TIGTA OI aggressively investigates these criminal activities to ensure that taxpayers maintain confidence in the integrity of federal tax administration. Here's how the impersonation scam generally works. The intended victim receives an unsolicited telephone call from a live person or from an automated call dialer. The caller, using a fake name and sometimes a fictitious IRS employee badge number, claims to be an IRS or Department of the Treasury employee. The scammers often use voice-over internet protocol technology to hide their tracks and create false telephone numbers that show up on the victim's caller ID system. This technique is known as spoofing. For example, the scammers may make it appear as though the calls are originating from the IRS, in Washington, D.C., or elsewhere in the U.S., when in fact they may have originated from other locations around the globe. The caller may even know the last 4 digits of the victim's Social Security number, or have other personal information about the victim or the victim's location. The impersonator claims that the intended victim owes taxes to the IRS and that if those taxes are not paid immediately, the victim will be arrested, sued, or face other adverse actions. Other threats for non-payment include the loss of a driver's license or business license or deportation. The impersonators often leave so-called urgent messages and may call the victim multiple times. Initially, the victims we interviewed said the scammers demanded that they make payment using prepaid debit cards, wire transfers, Western Union payments, or MoneyGram payments. However, the scam has continued to evolve over time, and starting in April 2016, we noted that the victims were being told to pay the impersonators using Apple iTunes gift cards. Regardless of the method of payment, by the time victims realized that they had been scammed, generally the funds were long gone. The impersonators are aggressive and relentless in their contacts with taxpayers. One of the victims reported that the impersonator told her she needed to wire the money within 10 minutes. He further told her not to tell anyone what she was doing and to stay on the telephone with him throughout the entire transaction. In February 2017, TIGTA had the opportunity to testify before the Senate Special Committee on Aging regarding the impersonation and lottery scams. One of the impersonation scam victims shared his story with the committee and viewers through a video recording, which we will share with you now.
I want to thank you all for joining us, and we'll now start with the video.
My name is Philip Hatch. I'm 81 years old, and I'm from Portland, Maine, born and raised. I received a telephone call. I answered the phone, and the man said he was a representative from the Internal Revenue Service. I said, what can I do to help you? He said, well, we've gone through the records, and there's been a mistake here on your returns, and you owe us $5,988 and some odd cents. So I said, fine. Tell me who I make the check out to and where do I mail it? He says, well, we can't do that. We have a warrant out for your arrest, and the marshals will be in your house within an hour. And I said, well, what would you like me to do to help resolve this? They said, you can go to CVS and get those iTunes cards, and just when you come back, you can read the numbers off to us. So the other guy said, that doesn't sound like a very professional way to do it. He said, well, it's either that or the marshal's coming, and if we can do this, we can tell them not to come. So I did. I went and got these little iTunes cards, came back, read the numbers off them, and they said, okay, now you can't tell anybody about this. I said, what do you mean I can't tell anybody about this? I'm going to tell my guy that makes up my tax returns. I'm a little mad at him. You know, he said he made a mistake. They said, well, no, don't do that. Everything will be taken care of. This started at 4 in the afternoon and went on till 8 o'clock at night. They called me the next day, and they said there was a mistake. I said, what do you mean a mistake? It wasn't $5,900 something. It was $23,000. They had somebody call me on the regular phone. I'm still on my cell phone, and say that he was a Portland police officer, and that they had a local warrant for my arrest. So I put my son on the phone, and he goes, who's this? And they said, well, who's this? And he goes, he gave him a phony name and said he was an FBI agent. And they said, whoops. And they hung up. And that was the end of it. But I had already sent in $8,000 to these people. Being in the military and working for the government, the government calls up and you say, aye, sir, what do you need? Can I help you? Okay. And maybe if I hadn't had that background, I wouldn't have been so cooperative. But I was mad, upset that I was taken in. Just give me 5 minutes in a room alone with those people, and I'd be happy. All I can say is just be wary, just be careful, and when it comes to someone going after your money, just say, listen, I'll think about it over tonight, and you can get back to me tomorrow, and then contact someone and find out. That's the best advice I could do.
As you can see, this is really outrageous and illustrates the lengths to which these criminals will go. And a lot of times they do target people who are either isolated or have been in the military. We did a whole hearing on scams that are directed at those who've been in the military. And they will stop at nothing. They kept Mr. Hatch on the phone for 4 hours, from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m., getting him to go from place to place to buy the iTunes card, which is a new variation that we're seeing on the IRS imposter scam. And it frightens people when they get a call from someone claiming to be from the IRS. It frightens all of us to get that kind of call. And it's become so sophisticated that these con artists can spoof the number so it looks like, if they have caller ID, it'll say U.S. Treasury. So that makes them think that it is for real. And it just shows that they will stop at nothing.
Mr. Hatch's story is unfortunately similar to those of thousands of other victims. Significant progress has been made in combating this plague of fraud, however. TIGTA has made numerous arrests in connection with this scam and has a variety of investigations underway. TIGTA has arrested, indicted, or prosecuted more than 70 individuals and 5 call centers. I'm pleased to now share some examples of the exemplary investigative work by TIGTA OI employees in this fight to protect taxpayers and the IRS. After an exhaustive 3-year joint investigation, in October 2016, the U.S. Department of Justice in the Southern District of Texas obtained an indictment on 56 individuals, some of whom were located in the U.S., plus 5 call centers located in India. The investigation identified a total of approximately $272 million of fraud and thousands of victims. This is the largest single domestic law enforcement action to date involving the IRS impersonation scam. The indictment included charges related to at least 2 different scams. One of the scams involved the impersonation of IRS officers and defrauded U.S. residents by misleading them into believing that they owed money to the IRS and would be arrested and fined if they did not pay the alleged back taxes immediately. Another scam involved the impersonation of U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services officers and defrauded U.S. residents by misleading them into believing that they would be deported unless they immediately paid a fine for alleged problems with their immigration paperwork. Conspirators operating at call centers in India obtained and distributed lead lists and scripts containing PII for the purpose of contacting and defrauding potential victims. Then the callers, purporting to be U.S. government officials or lenders, telephoned victims and threatened them with prosecution, arrest, or other adverse actions for alleged tax or immigration violations unless they paid the fictitious fines or fees immediately. Callers instructed victims exactly how to make the demanded payment. The callers extorted one victim, a resident of California, of approximately $136,000 by pretending to be IRS agents and demanding payment for alleged tax violations. The victim was directed to purchase 276 money pack stored value cards and transmit the PINs to the callers. The callers extorted another victim from Brooklyn, New York, of more than $121,000, also by fraudulently purporting to be IRS employees, threatening to arrest the victim, and demanding payment for alleged tax violations. The callers directed this victim to make payments into approximately 20 different bank accounts and to send wire transfers via Western Union. This complex fraud scheme resulted in hundreds of millions of dollars in victim losses. Over 15,000 known victims have incurred losses attributable to scam calls, and upwards of 50,000 individuals have had their identities misappropriated based on the unauthorized use of their PII. A number of defendants in this case have been arrested in various locations within the U.S., and additional legal actions are anticipated. In another case, the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York announced the sentencing of Sahil Patel in July 2015 for his role in a massive impersonation scheme. Patel, an Indian citizen, knowingly conspired with others to commit extortion by falsely impersonating a federal officer and demanding money. Victims were told they would be arrested or otherwise charged with crimes by agents of the FBI or the IRS if they did not make payments to him and his co-conspirators. Conspirators sometimes called victims numerous times, even after payment had been made, and at times used the physical addresses of the FBI office and the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York for the subscriber information that was associated with their telephone numbers. Patel was sentenced to 175 months, more than 14 years, in prison, and the court entered a forfeiture judgment in the amount of $1 million against him. In November 2015, the Senate Special Committee on Aging made a direct referral to TIGTA involving a senior citizen located in Florida who who was so frightened by the IRS impersonators that he immediately drove to his local Walmart while remaining on the phone. During the drive, he crashed his vehicle, but continued on foot to Walmart to obtain the MoneyGram payment demanded by the impersonators. He subsequently reported his experience to the Aging Committee's fraud hotline, which contacted TIGTA. TIGTA special agents worked diligently on this referral and ultimately identified 5 suspects in Miami. As a result of that referral and subsequent investigative activities, on May 23, 2016, TIGTA agents arrested the 5 suspects. All 5 were subsequently indicted for their roles in an impersonation scam. As in the other cases, taxpayers across the U.S. received telephone calls from persons who falsely represented themselves to be government officials, in most cases agents of the IRS, and employed strategies to threaten or entice the victims into making an immediate payment. Often the callers would accuse the victims of owing delinquent taxes, when in fact they did not. Taxpayers were instructed to go to a nearby business that offered wire transfer services and to wire the money immediately. Typically, the victims were provided with a fictitious IRS employee's name and the state where the money was to be sent. All 5 of the indicted individuals used fictitious identities and collected victims' wired money. 2 of the defendants were known to have traveled together to at least 18 states to collect money wired by unsuspecting taxpayers. They used approximately 31 different false identities and received monies totaling over $2 million from approximately 1,000 victims. As a continuation of this investigation, on April 27, 2017, TIGTA Inspector General J. Russell George announced that agents representing TIGTA and the Social Security Administration Office of the Inspector General had arrested 8 more suspects on April 25th in Miami, Florida. The arrests were based upon indictments that charged 11 individuals who were allegedly involved in IRS impersonation schemes. According to the court documents, the 11 suspects are responsible for more than $8.8 million in schemes that defrauded more than 7,000 victims. Records indicated some of the defendants had picked up more than 100 wire transfers from victims within just a period of a few days. While the prosecution of these individuals and others has not completely eradicated impersonation scams, these efforts have certainly decimated the scourge. While at its peak, the scammers were claiming more than 500 victims a week, but lately the number of weekly victims has generally dwindled to 30 or less, a mere trickle by comparison. TIGTA OI continues its pursuit in protecting vulnerable Americans from getting scammed out of their life savings. We remain determined to be as aggressive and relentless as these criminals in our commitment to bringing everyone involved in this fraud to justice. While the impersonation scam was growing at an unprecedented rate, another scam, the lottery scam, also continued to target and victimize older adults. Although the lottery scam was not nearly the size or scope of the impersonation scam, its results were equally devastating for its victims. Its premise is simple. The scammer contacts the victim to advise the victim that he or she has won a lottery or some type of prize, but before the winnings can be released, the victim is instructed to pay a non-existent federal tax in order to receive the prize. Likewise, advanced fee schemes use similar techniques to induce victims to pay non-existent fees and taxes for a variety of fraudulent promises and representations. These scams are very effective in their use of the IRS as a means to cause confusion with their intended victims. Over the last several years, TIGTA has conducted investigations that have identified approximately 30 individuals who were responsible for defrauding victims out of millions of dollars related to the various lottery schemes. An example of one of these schemes is the case of Willie Montgomery. Montgomery was sentenced in the District of Nevada in April 2017 for his role in a telemarketing fraud scheme that was intended to target victims over the age of 55. Montgomery and his co-conspirators obtained lead sheets which identified persons who had previously entered sweepstakes, lotteries, or other prize drawing contests, and who were thus thought to be susceptible to misrepresentations regarding potentially winning a prize. They knew these lead sheets typically consisted of contact information for elderly or retirement-age people or others who might be particularly vulnerable or susceptible to schemes. Using the lead sheet information, the conspirators, or talkers, would contact potential victims by telephone and falsely represent to them that they had won prizes consisting of large amounts of cash or other high-value merchandise. The talker would hold himself out as being an official or employee of the lottery or sweepstakes committee or a government regulatory authority, including the IRS. The victim was told that in order to receive the prize, he or she must first send money as payment for taxes on prize winnings or other fees. The victim would be directed to send payment via a variety of methods, and individuals referred to as runners were then used to retrieve the payments and deliver the money to the conspirators. In total, the conspirators fraudulently obtained more than $1.17 million from the scheme, which claimed at least 66 victims from 22 different states. Montgomery was sentenced to more than 7 years in prison and was ordered to pay restitution totaling over $1.16 million. The next two cases also involved schemes to obtain money from older adults by informing them that they had won prizes in an international sweepstakes lottery, but that before they could claim their prizes, they had to pay fees and taxes. In October 2016, Dale Ferguson was convicted and sentenced in the Southern District of New York in connection with a Jamaican lottery scheme. Ferguson, who entered the United States using a Jamaican passport, was involved in a scheme where victims were contacted by telephone, fax, and email, and were requested to pay fees and taxes on supposed sweepstakes winnings. However, there was no sweepstakes, and the victims never received any cash prizes. Ferguson received more than $430,000 from approximately 87 different individuals throughout the U.S. Approximately 59 of the victims were over 60 years old, and approximately 43 of those were over 70. One of the victims, a resident of Connecticut, received a letter purporting to be from a tax return officer with the IRS. That letter advised that the victim had won $750,000, which purportedly had been processed through the IRS office. Additionally, the victim received several telephone calls from various individuals, including an individual who identified herself as an employee of the IRS and demanded that the victim make payment in order to receive the supposed winnings. As a result of the telephone calls and emails, the victim sent approximately $20,000 through various means to numerous individuals, including Dale Ferguson. Ferguson was sentenced to 33 months in prison and was ordered to pay restitution to the victims, totaling more than $439,000. In the second case, Adrian Foster, who also entered the U.S. with a Jamaican passport, was convicted and sentenced in January 2017 in the Southern District of New York. For at least 5 years, Foster and others participated in a telemarketing scheme to defraud victims, many of whom were elderly. Members of the conspiracy in Jamaica purchased lists containing the names, contact information, and ages of individuals living in the U.S. Then they telephoned these individuals and informed them that they had won the lottery, but that they must pay various taxes and fees prior to receiving their winnings. One victim from Ohio received numerous phone calls and letters requesting funds for taxes, insurance, and money releases. As a result, the victim sent tens of thousands of dollars, including a certified check made out to Adrian Foster in the amount of $60,000, but did not receive any winnings. Another victim, born in 1925 and residing in California, was contacted and informed that she had won $4.5 million in the lottery. This victim received written correspondence from an individual claiming to be employed by the IRS. The victim said that the IRS contact was scheduled to bring a $795,000 check and a car worth $72,000 to her on a specified date. No one called or visited the victim on that date. The victim's financial records revealed that large sums of money, at least $570,000, had been wired to two of Foster's co-conspirators. In total, Foster and his co-conspirators defrauded the victims of more than $1 million during the course of the conspiracy. Foster was sentenced to 15 months incarceration, was ordered to forfeit over $23,000, and pay restitution to the victims of more than $72,000. Identity theft tax refund fraud occurs when an individual uses another person's name and taxpayer identification number, or SSN, to file a fraudulent tax return. Unscrupulous individuals steal identities for use in submitting tax returns to the IRS with false information and documents for the sole purpose of receiving a fraudulent tax refund. Identity theft tax refund fraud affects both individuals and businesses. In order for the country's tax system to succeed, taxpayers must have confidence in the fair and impartial administration of federal tax laws and regulations. IRS employee misconduct, whether real or perceived, can erode the public's trust and impede the IRS's ability to effectively enforce tax laws. It is particularly troubling when IRS employees who are entrusted with the sensitive personal and financial information of taxpayers misuse their positions in furtherance of identity theft and other fraud schemes. This breach of trust negatively impacts our nation's voluntary tax system and erodes confidence in the IRS. TIGTA proactively reviews the activities of IRS employees who access taxpayer accounts for any indication of unauthorized accesses that may be part of a larger fraud scheme. In August 2016, former IRS employee Nikisha Hall was sentenced for her role in orchestrating a large-scale identity theft refund scheme. Hall began working at the IRS in 2000 and since 2007 was employed in the IRS Taxpayer Advocate Service. The Taxpayer Advocate Service function is responsible for assisting taxpayers who are having difficulties with the IRS, often because they are victims of identity theft, needing assistance in removing fraudulent tax information from their accounts and with filing corrected tax returns. By virtue of her IRS employment, Hall had the ability to access taxpayers' PII, including names, dates of birth, and SSNs. Hall's authority to access this information, however, was limited to official business purposes. Hall was fully aware of these limitations. As part of her scheme to defraud the IRS, and for the purpose of personal financial gain, Hall intentionally exceeded her authorization at work and accessed thousands of names, dates of birth, and SSNs for non-business purposes, running various searches through the IRS's system, looking for individuals who met certain criteria. Hall then used the fraudulently obtained information to file hundreds of fraudulent individual income tax returns. Not only were these returns not authorized by the taxpayers whose identities were used, they also contained false and fraudulent information in order to generate improper and artificially inflated refunds. After Hall came up with the idea for the scheme, she approached others for assistance in retrieving and liquidating the refunds. Hall abused her position of trust as an IRS employee to devise and execute this complex multi-year scheme affecting hundreds of victims and involving hundreds of fraudulent tax returns and refunds. Overall, the scheme resulted in claims for over $1 million against the U.S. Treasury and successfully obtained over $400,000. Hall carefully searched for the victims while at the IRS and using IRS resources, effectively victimizing the citizens of the U.S. and jeopardizing the reputation of the IRS. Hall was sentenced to 110 months, or more than 9 years, in prison and was ordered to pay restitution to the IRS totaling more than $438,000. TIGTA OI aggressively investigates the type of crimes we have discussed, as well as other crimes affecting tax administration, and coordinates with the United States Attorney's offices to pursue the successful prosecution of the perpetrators. We have provided ongoing oversight and testimony on the issue of tax fraud and scams to the Senate Special Committee on Aging and various other committees as well. In addition to our investigative efforts, TIGTA has taken numerous other steps to combat the impersonation scam and protect taxpayers from being victimized. In one such effort, OI created and implemented a three-pronged advise and disrupt strategy. The first part of this strategy involves analyzing and using the telephone numbers reported to TIGTA. If a number is confirmed to be part of the scam, OI identifies the telephone carrier and requests that the carrier take the number down. A second part of the strategy is to post scam-related telephone numbers on the internet. which allows potential victims to determine if the call they received was part of the scam. The final part of the strategy is to deploy a TIGTA auto dialer to call back the impersonators with a message ordering them to cease and desist their criminal activity, while also occupying the impersonator's time and telephone lines. This has resulted in over 145,000 auto-dialed calls back to the scammers. As of May 30th, 2017, more than 1,200 telephone numbers associated with the scam have been identified using the Advise and Disrupt strategy, and 93% of them have been successfully shut down, in some cases within a week. Tax-related identity theft and IRS impersonation telephone scams cause a strain upon limited IRS and TIGTA resources and challenge the integrity of federal tax administration. TIGTA is dedicated to educating the public about identity theft and IRS impersonation scams in its efforts to prevent fraud against the IRS and to protect U.S. taxpayers from falling prey to these scams. We have been working closely with the IRS, Federal Trade Commission, Federal Communications Commission, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Veterans Affairs, U.S. Attorney's offices, and a variety of state and local governments, as well as media outlets, to publish press releases, warnings, and other public awareness announcements to alert taxpayers to these scams. TIGTA urges taxpayers to remain on high alert and continues to conduct outreach efforts to prevent them from falling victim to criminals who impersonate IRS and Treasury Department employees. Our expanded outreach includes public service announcements available on YouTube in both English and Spanish that warn taxpayers about the scam. Additionally, hundreds of messages are appearing daily on social media platforms, including Twitter. TIGTA employees participated in 2 separate information telethons sponsored by the WJLA News Center in Arlington, Virginia. Volunteers from TIGTA, the IRS, the FTC, and the local police fielded calls from concerned taxpayers regarding the IRS impersonation scam. As the impersonation scam progressed, OI also worked with private sector companies that were caught in the middle of the massive fraud. The companies used by the impersonators to monetize the scam cooperated by using techniques to help warn consumers. For example, when a prepaid debit card is purchased, there's a fraud warning that now appears on the signature screen. Likewise, MoneyGram has placed banners on its kiosks advising customers that if they have been told to pay their taxes by MoneyGram, it is a scam and they should not proceed with the transaction. Since Apple iTunes cards became a major source for impersonators to cash in on the fraud, Apple worked with TIGTA to create an audio message to help protect consumers. Apple also agreed to fund the nationwide distribution of this message at grocery and convenience stores, which resulted in more than 46 million consumers hearing this valuable message. Further, Walmart stores has agreed to train its employees and post warning placards and fraud warning messages on cash envelopes. How can TIGTA's Victim Witness Program assist those that have fallen prey to these unscrupulous individuals, and what resources are available for victims to obtain additional information or to report crimes to TIGTA? OI victim witness coordinators and special agents are trained to ensure victims are notified of their statutory rights and services under federal law. Victim witness coordinators can help identify applicable services for victims and facilitate referrals to such. Coordinators can provide a number of resources for identity theft victims so they can begin to remedy the situation created by the theft of their PII. Coordinators and special agents can provide victims with appropriate IRS contacts when necessary to rectify special tax situations created by a crime. Coordinators ensure victim contact information is provided to the appropriate prosecuting authority for subsequent notifications and court enforceable rights under federal victim witness statutes. Information and warnings are posted on TIGTA's public website and are updated as scams progress. There is a simple reporting process for the IRS impersonation scam on TIGTA's public website. Several other reporting methods are available to those who do not have internet access or are not comfortable with that reporting method. In conclusion, just remember this warning. The IRS will not contact you by phone with threats for non-payment of a tax liability. Nor does the IRS require Green Dot, iTunes, Amazon, MoneyPack, or any other kind of gift card or prepaid debit card for tax payment. Beware of IRS impersonation scams. What should you do if you suspect the call is a scam? First, just hang up. If you think you may owe federal taxes, do not engage these callers. Hang up and call the IRS yourself at 1-800-829-1040. IRS workers can help answer your questions about any real liability. If you do not owe taxes, hang up and complete the IRS impersonation scam reporting form on TIGTA's website, or call TIGTA's hotline at 1-800-366-4484. You can also file a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission. Please add the phrase IRS telephone scam to the comments in your complaint. Thank you for joining us and helping in our efforts to educate taxpayers of all ages about criminal activity and schemes that impact federal tax administration and our nation's revenue stream.